happened so suddenly. One moment I was driving, lost in thought, and the next everything shifted. The world around me collapsed, a screeching noise, a flash of light. Then silence. I don't remember the crash itself, but I remember the instant after. I felt as though I was floating, weightless, separated from the chaos of the world below. I was outside my body, watching it from a distance. The image was strange, like a shell of who I was, motionless and alone. But there was no pain, no fear. In that moment, I wasn't sure if I was alive or dead. I only knew that I was somewhere else, somewhere vast, and the air was filled with the strange, almost tangible presence. The world around me had changed. I could no longer see the bright city lights, the dark roads, or the sky above. Instead, there was only an overwhelming sense of warmth and peace. I wasn't alone. There, standing before me, was a figure, radiant and calm, a presence that was at once familiar and deeply otherworldly. His figure emanated a gentle light, not blinding but soft. Like the dawn, it was as if every moment around me was carrying infinite love and wisdom. He didn't speak at first, but I felt his gaze, calm yet knowing. I felt his understanding pierce through me, not as judgment, but as a gentle invitation to something deeper, something far beyond my own understanding. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, unsure if I was even speaking aloud. "It's happening. Enjoy the sun." The figure smiled, a smile that felt both timeless and infinite. His eyes, those eyes, spoke in ways words could not. They were full of compassion, full of understanding. The warmth in them was not like anything I had ever felt. It was more than comfort. It was a kind of knowing, a gentle assurance that everything, no matter how chaotic or painful, would make sense eventually. "You are at the threshold," he said softly. "You are at the place where all questions find their answers. Here, there is no time, no beginning or end. You stand between worlds. You literally enter two worlds, and you move between the same one." I felt a weight lift from my chest as his words settled deep within me. I wasn't afraid. There was no fear, only curiosity, a longing to understand, to know more, but also a deep longing to feel more, a feeling that this place, this moment, was where I had always belonged. Now his voice carried on, a gentle rhythm that seemed to echo in my soul. "You have lived your life, and now you are being given a choice. You can stay here where all is peaceful, or you can return to the world you left behind." A question swirled in my mind, but I couldn't quite form it. He seemed to know before I spoke. "Why me?" I asked. "Why am I here? Why now?" "But besides what you've already said," the figure nodded as though he understood. "It is not by chance that you are here," he replied. "Your life, your journey has led you to this point. Now the time has come to see the truth, truths that few are ready to hear. But your journey, your understanding is part of a much larger story. You will see what others cannot. You will know what many refuse to understand." The world around me seemed to shift again, and for a brief moment, the light grew brighter, almost blinding, yet not uncomfortable. It was as though the very air was made of energy and truth. And everything around me was calling me to listen, to understand, to awaken. I felt as though I were being pulled gently out of the stillness of the moment. There was a sense that I was about to learn something, something that would forever change my understanding of life, of death, of everything I thought I knew. "You will witness what is coming," the figure said, his voice becoming a soft whisper. "The world you once knew is changing, and what you are about to see will challenge everything you have believed. But for some reason, you think none of these things are true?" Wait, before I could ask anything more, the light shifted again. I found myself standing, not alone, but in the presence of a vast crowd. The world had changed. The people around me were gathered in a place that felt both familiar and unfamiliar, like a city of the future, yet also timeless, a reflection of something that had always been. The sky above was no longer the same. It was darker, covered by a web of shifting mechanical structures that seemed to stretch for miles. Beneath the sky, the people walked by, unaware of the change that was upon them. They were absorbed in their devices, their faces illuminated by the glow of screens, their eyes fixed on the technology in their hands. There was no longer any real connection between them, no real human interaction. I watched as a man passed by, his face etched with worry, his hand clutching a small device that seemed to control his every movement. I felt a pang of sadness, of loss, but also a deep knowing this wasn't just his story. This was everyone's story. The divine figure appeared beside me, and I turned to him, silently asking for answers. He gave me a look of understanding, as though he could hear every thought in my mind. "The mark is coming," he said, his voice filled with both sorrow and compassion. "It will not come as a sudden force, but as a slow and steady tide. People will not see it as a threat. They will see it as salvation, convenience, security. But it is a lie." I felt a chill run through me, as though the weight of his words were settling deep into my bones. The mark. I didn't understand fully, but I knew that it was a powerful, insidious force, one that would lead humanity away from the divine and into a trap they could never escape. "But why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why would they fall for it?" The figure's eyes darkened for a moment, but there was no judgment, only compassion. "Because they will be promised things they have long desired. Security, control, comfort. They will be convinced that it is the answer, but the mark will rob them of their souls. It will take away their connection to the divine, to each other." I stood in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. The people around me were moving, for they were not truly living. They were caught in a web of deception, and they didn't even know it. I turned to the divine figure again, my heart heavy. "What can be done? What can I do?" What can I do?" His smile returned, soft and knowing. "You can return, and you will share what you have seen. You will be a beacon of light, a voice for those who cannot see. You must help them prepare, help them understand. The time to wake up is now. The time to act is now." And with those words, everything began to fade. I felt myself being pulled back, my body pulling away from this divine presence, this otherworldly realm. The feeling of peace began to slip away, and I felt the weight of the world again, the weight of reality, pulling me back to the place I had left behind. The voices of the world returned, the noise, the chaos. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I would never be the same again. I awoke to a strange, overwhelming sense of clarity. The world around me was both eerily familiar and vastly different. The divine figure stood by me again, his presence as soothing and powerful as it had been before. But now, I felt a deeper sense of urgency, a need to understand what was coming, what I was being shown. "You have returned," he said gently, "and now you must see the path that is unfolding before you, the path that so many will follow without even knowing where it leads." The words lingered in my mind as I looked around. This place, wherever it was, seemed to shift like a dream. The air felt alive with possibilities, and yet there was an underlying sadness that I couldn't ignore. I could feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths pressing against my chest, urging me to listen, to understand. "What is it you want me to see?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure's eyes met mine, and I felt his understanding of my question, as though he could see straight into my soul. "You are about to witness the future, the future that is being shaped right now, the future that many will walk into unknowingly. The mark is not something that will come all at once, but something that will creep in slowly, disguised as something good, something necessary. And as the world changes, so too will the hearts of its people. He raised his hand, and the space around us began to shift. What had once been an abstract world of light and feeling became something more tangible. Suddenly, I was standing in the middle of a crowded city. The noise, the rush of people, the constant hum of technology, it was overwhelming. I could hear conversations, see people moving in every direction, each lost in their own world. The air was filled with a sense of urgency, a kind of quiet panic that pulsed beneath the surface. I looked around in confusion, but the figure beside me remained calm, unbothered by the chaos. "This is the world you will return to," he said. "But what you see here is not the whole truth. The world is changing, and so too are its people. Many will embrace the change, not realizing what they are surrendering in the process. To put it bitterly, the great darkness seeks to destroy the ones once at a time it decreases." I watched as a man passed by, his face glued to a screen, his steps hurried but aimless. He was dressed in business attire, but there was something hollow about him, something missing in his eyes. He didn't look at the people around him, didn't notice the world beyond his screen. And as he walked past, I noticed a small, subtle symbol on his wrist. It was nearly invisible, but there it was, a tiny glowing mark, almost like a tattoo that shimmered with a strange light. I turned to the figure beside me, my heart racing. "What is that?" I asked. "It's the first signs of the mark," he replied softly. "It is not yet widespread, but it is beginning. Small at first, a symbol of convenience, of ease, of technology that promises to make life better. A simple thing, almost harmless, but it is not harmless. It is a deception." The scene around me began to shift again, and I found myself standing in a different place. This time I was in home, watching as a family gathered around a table for dinner. They smiled and laughed, but again, something was off. The parents were distracted by their own devices, the children too, their faces glowing with the same eerie light. There was no connection between them. The conversation was fragmented, and the atmosphere felt empty, even though they were physically together. "Do you see it?" the figure asked gently. "Do you see how they have become disconnected from each other? This is what the mark will do. It will promise to make life easier, more efficient, but it will strip people of their humanity. It will replace real relationships with digital interactions. And the more people embrace it, the less they will truly execute it." And later, less than 2 hours later, I felt a cold shiver run through me. The image of that family, lost in their own screens, their hearts distant from one another, haunted me. It was as if they were not living, only existing. The promise of a better life, of ease and convenience, had led them to a place where they no longer truly connected with the ones they loved. The figure continued, his voice steady but filled with deep sorrow. "This will not happen overnight. It will happen slowly, in stages. People will not be forced into it. They will choose it willingly. They will be promised security, health, happiness, all the things they have been longing for. And they will accept it, not understanding that in doing so, they are giving away their souls." I tried to grasp the weight of his words, but I couldn't fully comprehend it. It felt too much, too overwhelming. "But why? Why would people choose this?" I asked. "Why would they accept something that takes away their freedom, their connection to each other and to God?" The figure turned toward me, his eyes filled with a profound sadness, but also with a quiet strength. "People will be deceived. They will be told that the mark is the answer to all their problems. In a world that is growing more chaotic, more divided, they will see it as a lifeline, as the only way to survive. And in that moment of desperation, they will surrender. The promise of comfort, of safety, will be too great. They will not see the danger. They will not see the price they are paying." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. Then he looked at me, his gaze piercing, yet filled with understanding. But you must understand this. The mark is not just a symbol. It is a choice. It is a decision that will determine the fate of the soul, and those who accept it will lose something far greater than they can ever imagine. I could feel the depth of what he was saying, the weight of the truth that was unfolding before me. I wasn't sure I could fully grasp it, but I knew it was important. This was the world I was returning to, and the people I would meet, their choices, their futures. They would be shaped by this decision, a decision they would make unknowingly without fully understanding the cost. But even in the darkness of this revelation, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance perhaps to change the course of things. The figure's voice broke through my thoughts once again, soft and steady. "Manai," he laughed. "Not all is lost," he said, his words full of promise. "There is still time. There is still a chance to awaken, to choose a different path. But you must be ready. You must be strong. For those who remain faithful will find strength in each other and in God in ways that will protect them from the darkness to come." The vision shifted again, and I found myself back in the city, the same people moving around me. But now I saw them differently. I saw the fear in their eyes, the unease beneath their masks of contentment. I saw the emptiness in their hearts, and I knew that the time to act was growing short. As the vision began to fade, I heard the figure's voice once more, soft but urgent. "The time is coming, and when it does, you will be ready." And just like that, the world around me began to blur, the city fading into the distance, the divine figure's presence slowly slipping away. I didn't know what would come next, but I felt the weight of the responsibility on my heart. The revelations had begun, and now it was up to me to understand them, to share them with others. But the road ahead would not be easy. I knew that much for sure. The world around me began to blur once more, and I felt a gentle pull, as if someone was guiding me through another shift. I had barely adjusted to the weight of the revelations when I was once again in a different place. This time the surroundings were quiet, serene even, but there was a palpable sense of unease hanging in the air. I felt as though I was witnessing a pivotal moment in history, one where the lines between truth and falsehood were becoming dangerously blurred. The figure stood beside me once more, his calm presence a stark contrast to the rising tension in my chest. "You are seeing it now," he said softly, his voice filled with sorrow yet resolute. "The subtlety of the mark. It is not something that will be forced upon people. No, it will be accepted, little by little, through promises of convenience, of security, of a life made better by technology." I stood in what appeared to be a modest home, the kind of place where families gathered for meals, where laughter and conversation once flowed freely. But now there was something different, a coldness in the air. People sat around the dinner table, but their attention was consumed by the small devices in their hands. Smartphones, tablets, screens that seemed to pulse with an unnatural glow. "This is where it begins," the figure continued. "People will not see the harm at first. They will be told that these technologies, these devices, are the solutions to the problems they face. They will be promised safety, health, and the convenience of a connected life. And as the years pass, they will grow more dependent on these things until the mark becomes a natural extension of their existence." I watched as the family members interacted with their devices, faces illuminated by the artificial light of the screens. They didn't look at each other. They didn't speak. The warmth of connection had been replaced by the cold, isolating glow of technology. It wasn't just the devices themselves that were changing them. It was the subtle, insidious pull of the mark. I turned to the figure, a question rising in my chest. How will they not see it? How can they not see that they are giving away their freedom, their humanity? The figure's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on my shoulder. "They will be deceived," he said, his voice filled with a deep sadness. "The promise of security, of control over their lives, will blind them to the truth. The mark will not appear as a sinister force. It will come as a choice, an easy one, a choice that seems logical, even necessary. The vision shifted, and I found myself in a bustling city square. The crowds were moving like a river, people walking with purpose, but they all seemed to be in a hurry, disconnected from one another. It was as if they were living in a world of convenience, but that convenience came at the cost of something far more valuable: their connection to each other and their awareness of the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface. The mark will begin as a simple thing, the figure explained, his voice echoing in my mind. A chip, a tattoo, a biometric implant, something small, something that seems harmless. People will be told it is for their protection, a way to stay safe, to manage their health, to make life easier. And slowly, they will accept it. I watch as a man walked by, his arm outstretched, a small device embedded in his wrist. It glowed faintly, almost imperceptible to anyone else around him, but to me, it was clear. This was the beginning. A world where no one questioned the devices that controlled their lives, where the need for privacy, for freedom, was slowly eroded in favor of something more efficient, more secure. Do you see? The figure asked. It will be an easy decision at first. People will embrace the mark not out of malice, but out of convenience. They will tell themselves it's for the greater good, for their children, for their future. They will be promised that it will make their lives easier, that it will solve their problems. They will not see the trap until it's too late. The scene shifted again, and this time I found myself standing in a sterile, modern hospital room. The bright white walls were spotless, and the smell of antiseptic lingered in the air. A woman lay on a bed connected to a series of machines, her face pale but peaceful. She was surrounded by her family, all of them with their eyes glued to their devices, no one speaking to each other, no one holding her hand, no one offering comfort. The figure's voice echoed in my mind once again, this time with a deeper urgency. Here, you see the full effect. Technology promises to heal, to restore, to save. But it cannot heal the soul. It cannot restore what is broken in the heart of humanity. And this is the greatest deception of all. The mark will be sold as a cure, as a solution to everything, but it will only lead to emptiness. Currently, I looked at the woman in the bed, her eyes closed, her soul seemingly absent from the room. The family around her was physically present, but their connection to one another, like so many others, had been severed. Replaced by the cold touch of technology, the promise of convenience has stolen their ability to truly be present, to truly love and care for one another. People will become so reliant on the technology that they will not realize what they are losing, the figure continued, his voice heavy with sorrow. Their faith will be tested, their humanity stripped away bit by bit. And as they grow more dependent, the mark will become the ultimate price they must pay. I felt a pang in my chest, a deep sense of loss as the scene began to fade, but the figure's voice remained as gentle and steady as ever. The mark will not come all at once, but piece by piece. Each step will seem harmless, each choice will feel like an improvement, but as they take each step, they will move further away from the truth. And their faith, the very foundation of their souls, will be tested in ways they cannot yet imagine. The world around me began to shift once again, the images blurring and fading, but I could still feel the weight of the revelations pressing against me. I understood now, in a way I hadn't before, how subtle the deception would be, how the promise of convenience, of safety, of a better life would slowly pull people into a web they couldn't escape. But even as the darkness of this truth settled around me, I could feel something else stirring within me, a quiet, steady strength. Perhaps there was still time. Perhaps there was still a chance for those who would listen, who would see past the false promises and recognize the truth beneath it all. I turned to the figure once more, my heart heavy but filled with a new resolve. "What must we do?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of the questions I had. The figure looked at me, his eyes filled with compassion and strength. "You must prepare," he said simply. "You must build your faith, your community, and your discernment. For when the time comes, It will be the faithful who stand firm, and they will be the ones who can help others see the truth. With those final words, the world around me began to shift once more, but I knew deep down that the lessons I had learned were only the beginning. The road ahead would not be easy, but there was hope. There was always hope, even in the darkest of times. And perhaps, just perhaps, the light would shine through once more. As the weight of the revelation settled deeper within me, I felt a sense of calm spread through my being. Though it was not the calm of ignorance or denial. No, this calm was different, quiet yet resolute. It was the peace that comes from knowing the truth, however difficult it may be to bear. I stood beside the divine figure, looking out at a world that seemed more fragile, more uncertain than ever before. And yet, in that moment, I knew that there was something I could do, something we all could do. The figure turned toward me, his eyes filled with both compassion and a firm resolve. "You have seen the coming trials," he said, his voice soft but strong. "Now, you must prepare. And not only for yourself, you must prepare for others, for those who will be lost, those who will not see what you have seen. You must be the light in the darkness, the guide for those who will need it most." His words struck me like a soft hammer, each one reverberating in the chambers of my heart. The path ahead was not just for me. It was for all those I could help along the way. The weight of the responsibility was daunting, but there was also a sense of purpose, a sense of mission that I had never felt before. This was the reason for my experience. This was the message I was meant to share. "How do I begin?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as though afraid the question would expose my uncertainty. The divine figure smiled gently. "The first step is to build your spiritual foundation. Without it, you cannot stand firm when the winds of change grow stronger, when the world around you begins to crumble under the weight of its own choices." I nodded, feeling a deep stirring within me. Spiritual growth, then, was the cornerstone. This was not the time for shallow beliefs or temporary faith. No, this was a call for deep, unshakable conviction, a faith that was grounded in love, in truth, and in the connection to something far greater than oneself. "You must cultivate your inner strength," he continued, his voice steady and warm. "Meditate. Pray. Seek connection with the divine in all things. The world will offer distractions, noise, and the false comforts of convenience. But in order to stand firm, you must be rooted in something deeper." I felt the weight of his words. And for the first time, I understood what it truly meant to be spiritually prepared. It was not just about surviving. It was about thriving in a world that had lost its way. To do so, I needed to nourish my soul, to feed it with the truth that transcended the shifting tides of the world. In prayer, in quiet reflection, in moments of deep connection with the divine, I would build my inner fortress. "Spiritual preparation is the foundation," the figure continued, "but it is not enough to be spiritually strong alone. You must also build your community, for in the days ahead, you will need each other more than ever." I looked around me as the scene began to shift. The once isolated homes filled with disconnected families faded away, replaced by a small village, a place where people gathered, shared, and supported one another. It was a simple place, but it felt like a sanctuary, a haven amidst a world teetering on the brink of chaos. "Communities are the vessels of hope," the figure said, his voice echoing with the wisdom of ages. "When the mark spreads, when fear and confusion grip the hearts of the people, it will be the communities that stand together, that hold fast to each other, that will endure." I saw the people in the village working side by side, families, friends, neighbors, building, farming, sharing meals, and caring for one another. There was no sense of isolation, no desperate need for the next technological fix. Instead, there was a deep sense of belonging, of purpose, of love. The bonds between them were tangible, like an invisible thread that connected their hearts. "The strength of your community will be your refuge," the figure continued. "You must cultivate relationships built on trust, compassion, and shared values. This will be your safety net when the world begins to unravel. When the mark becomes an overwhelming force, when the systems of control tighten around the people, your community will be a place of freedom, a place where truth can still be spoken. A deep sense of clarity washed over me. The divine figure was not just speaking about survival in the physical sense. He was speaking about survival in the emotional and spiritual sense. A strong, loving community would provide the foundation necessary for individuals to remain steadfast in their faith, even when the rest of the world was being swept away by the tide of deception. But it is not just about spiritual growth and community, the figure added, his eyes now serious with the weight of the coming days. You must also prepare practically. The world will change. And in order to help those around you, you must be able to provide for them, whether that be in food, shelter, or knowledge. I nodded, feeling the urgency of his words. What should I do? I asked. You must learn to be self-sufficient, he said, his voice calm but insistent. Learn how to grow your own food, how to provide for your own needs. Learn how to live simply without relying on the systems that will eventually fail. Practical knowledge, skills that are rooted in the earth and in the wisdom of the past will be your tools for survival. The scene shifted again, and I saw myself in a garden surrounded by rows of vegetables and herbs. The soil beneath my fingers felt rich and alive, and as I worked, I felt a deep connection to the earth, a connection that had long been forgotten in the hustle of modern life. It was a humbling experience, one that filled me with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. In that moment, I understood that practical preparation was not just about survival. It was about living with intention, about reconnecting to the rhythms of life that had been designed long before technology took hold. These skills will not just benefit you, the figure said, his gaze focused on me with unwavering intensity. They will allow you to help others. You will be able to share your resources, your knowledge, your strength. In this way, you will be a beacon of hope, a source of light in a world that will desperately need it. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the enormity of his words. How do I share this with others? I asked. How do I help them see what I see? The figure smiled, his expression filled with warmth. By living it, he said. By embodying the values you have learned. Your actions will speak louder than your words. Your faith, your community, your preparedness, they will be the proof that the world can still be saved. You will inspire others by the life you live, by the way you carry yourself in the face of adversity. I felt a deep sense of purpose rise within me, an unshakable knowing that this was my calling. This was why I had been shown these truths, to prepare myself, to prepare those around me, and to share this message of hope and faith with anyone willing to listen. As the vision began to fade, I took a deep breath, my heart filled with the knowledge that I had much to do. The road ahead would be long and the challenges would be great, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready. The time to prepare spiritually, practically, and communally was now. And I would share this message with all who would hear it. You see? Post for in the darkest of times, there would always be light. And it was up to me to help others see it. As the vision of the village faded, as the last echoes of the divine figure's words lingered in my soul, I felt a deep shift within myself. The peace I had found during my encounter with the divine was unlike anything I had ever known. But with it came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The weight of the mission I had been entrusted with began to settle, and it was clear. I was to share the lessons of faith, hope, and preparedness with the world. Yet, even as the clarity grew within me, there was a new presence beside me. It was not as grand or as imposing as the figure I had encountered, but it was a presence nonetheless. A soft, warm glow filled the space around me, and in that light, I saw a familiar face. One I had known in the deepest parts of my heart, but never quite in the way I saw it now. The figure spoke again, but this time, it was not with the urgency of preparation. There was something gentler in the tone, something filled with comfort and strength, as if the message I had been given was now to be woven into the very fabric of who I was becoming. "You have seen much," the figure said, his voice like a gentle breeze. "And you know that the world you return to will not be the same. It will grow darker. It will become harder. People will be deceived by the promises of convenience and safety. They will lose their way, and many will fall into despair." I felt the weight of his words settle over me, but rather than despair, I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet knowing that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way forward, a way to make it through. "Yes," I said softly, the words feeling true in my heart. "The world will grow darker, but it doesn't mean we must give in to that darkness." The divine figure smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "Exactly. The darkness may be inevitable, but it does not have to define you. The hope you carry within your heart is not dependent on the world around you. It is something that comes from a place deeper than circumstances. The light you carry within you will shine brightest in the darkest times." I stood there gazing into the figure's eyes, feeling an overwhelming sense of calm wash over me. How do I keep that light shining when everything else seems to be falling apart? I asked, the question that had been lingering in my heart for so long. The figure placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "By never forgetting that you are never alone," he replied. "Your faith, your love, your strength, these are not things you must create on your own. They are gifts that have been given to you. And as long as you remember to turn to them, as long as you remember to share them with others, the light will not go out." I felt a tear slip down my cheek, not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude. It was as though in that moment, every question I had ever had about my purpose in this world had been answered. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about forcing change. It was about faith, about community, and about staying true to the light that was already within. "The world will grow darker," the figure continued, his voice now steady and reassuring. "But with each person who stands firm in their faith, with each person who clings to hope and acts with love, the revival you long for, the revival that will come, will begin in hearts like yours. You have the power to ignite it in others." I took a deep breath, feeling the strength of his words, the weight of the promise. There was no grand declaration, no immediate transformation, but there was something deeper. It was the certainty that no matter what happened, I was not alone. And as long as I remained grounded in my faith and shared that faith with others, there would always be hope. "You will face challenges," the figure said, his tone now turning more reflective, as if reminding me of the journey that lay ahead. "The road will not be easy. There will be moments when you will feel like giving up, when the darkness will seem all-encompassing. But remember this, the smallest light can banish the deepest darkness. And you, my child, carry that light with you wherever you go." Did you tidy? I was a child. The words resonated deep within me, like the echo of a truth I had always known but never fully understood. I could feel my heart expanding, filled with the love and strength of the divine, and I knew that nothing could extinguish that light. It was mine, and it was meant to be shared with the world. That was the mission I had been given. I looked at the divine figure one last time, the last vestiges of his presence now beginning to fade. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice steady, though I felt the weight of it all. "So why?" He smiled, his eyes glowing with wisdom and love. "Now you return," he said softly. "You return with the knowledge that no matter how dark the world becomes, there is always the possibility of revival. There is always a chance for salvation, for redemption. And it starts with you, with the life you live, with the hope you share. The world does not need you to be perfect. It needs you to be faithful." The last words he spoke lingered in my heart as his presence dissolved into the light. Be faithful, and the light will always lead the way. I woke up with a start. The bright light of day poured into my vision, and I was suddenly aware of the beating of my heart, the air filling my lungs. My body, once broken and lifeless, felt alive again, though not in the way I had expected. The world, I realized, had not changed. The struggles, the challenges, the uncertainty. It was all still there. But I knew now that it was no longer the darkness that defined me. It was the light I carried within. And that light would guide me forward. No matter what came next, I was not alone. As I stood there, taking in my surroundings, I understood the depth of my mission. So my journey began again, not with fear, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The world needed what I had been shown, and I would be the one to carry the light forward, sharing it with all those I met along the way.